Hello everyone and welcome to week 9, day 1 of our semester. Yes, we have done much more than just get started. Today we are going to cover a large majority of chapter 8, which discusses American pioneers of psychology. And that's a little bit of a change for us because so many of the psychologists up to this point have been from Germany, right? Yeah, so we're going to talk specifically about William James today. And then following that discussion, what we will do is go over the study guide, and I will let you know maybe some items that you might want to focus on, as well as answer any questions. I know there were a lot of terms and a lot of people on that study guide, so I'd like to hold the last 10 to 15 minutes for us to do that, okay? All right. Before we start talking about James, we do need to finish up with Galton. And I don't know if you had an opportunity to read the announcements, but I actually uploaded something for you that is pretty unique. This is the actual manual that Galton used in his anthropometric laboratory. All right, and it says, arranged by Galton for the determination of height, weight, span, which is actually arm span, breathing power, strength of pull and squeeze, quickness of blow, hearing, seeing, color sense, and other personal data. The laboratory is situated in the East Corridor Annex, entrance from the South Gallery. Well, I thought this was really interesting to see, just from a historical standpoint. And we'll just quickly go through this. This page B2 talks about the object of the laboratory. In this, he talks about the different instruments that he created to measure a variety of things. And so in and of itself, it's just interesting to read about these creations. And this is an interesting aside on this last page. It talks about the color of the hair. It says, whether it be a race peculiarity or not, the color of the hair is related, at least in America, to certain forms of immunity from disease or susceptibility to it. It follows that the color of hair is a proper subject for this method. Of course, much more may we feel assured that obviously important personal data deserve measurement and registration. All right, and then this last page here is a list of the different items that he measures. And I know that's sideways, but I just want to go over a few of them. So right here is called the International Health Exhibition, 1884, long time ago, right? And it talks about things like you need to write down greatest distance in inches, reading the diamond type. What's the right eye eyesight and left eye eyesight? And then what's your goodness of color sense? So you mark that down. Hearing, judgment of eye, this is interesting. You're supposed to divide a line of 15 inches first into 3 parts and then into 2 parts, and your accuracy in making those divisions is notated on here. We have strength of the right hand and how many pounds can you pull. Span of the arms, I think I would have done really well on this. You're measuring from fingertip to fingertip, all right? Interesting, not sure what that's about, but maybe wingspan is really important to intelligence. They have height and weight, breathing power, greatest expiration in cubic inches, that's important clearly, and swiftness, of blow of hand in feet per second, and he had a special apparatus he used. I keep appearing and disappearing on the screen. Okay. And then on this bottom, it shows age of last birthday, married or unmarried, birthplace, occupation, and are you a town resident? So urban, suburban, or rural? I thought you would find that of interest. It's important to note that Galton did influence a very broad range of disciplines, and he was one of the most famous pioneers in the history of psychology. Some of the items that he's remembered for are the twin studies that he conducted to observe individual differences and the degree to which genetics shaped how a person turned out versus the role of the environment. He had self-report questionnaires, and that was really new. How many of you have taken a Likert scale questionnaire before? Yeah, so if you think about how common the self-report questionnaire is now, we have Galton to thank for that. Lest we be remiss, correlational studies, and we talked about that in class, right? And we didn't go really in detail, but you understand the importance of correlational studies. Investigation of mental imagery and word association. This was the idea that I give you a word, you say something back. Within a certain parameter, a variety of words would be acceptable and would indicate that psychologically you're okay, and then there would be words that might be very outside of the box that could indicate creativity or might indicate something more malicious. Same can be done with mental imagery. The thematic apperception test is a test where people are asked to look at a picture and tell the practitioner what that means. All right, so what does this picture mean? What is this scene? And again, there are a variety of responses that the clinician would take to be within the normal range, and then there are other responses that might indicate various, let's just say, individual differences. Okay. And then, of course, the nature versus nurture question is one that he really brought to the forefront of psychology. Okay, and the nature versus nurture ties in with the twin studies that he did. All right, of course, a lot of this is overshadowed by the unfortunate controversy. There was an issue of how to implement eugenic ideas. And remember, Galton was a cousin of Darwin, right? And had, on a lot of levels, good intentions behind all of this, right? And he thought he was doing a good thing by being a proponent of positive eugenics. Unfortunately, what happened, and this dates back to 1884, by the early 1900s, negative eugenics developed. And this developed in an effort to counteract the menace of the feeble-minded. We had feeble-minded people running about, and we needed to counteract that. And so we're going to figure out a way to perfect the race, right? So we have less of these people impeding our daily lives. Heritability is something that arose in the 1920s. And everyone, this was actually a statistical measure that was developed. What it did was examine the percentage of a characteristic's variability, be that, let's say, personality, intellectual ability, things of that nature, within a population that's determined by genetics. So in terms of personal characteristics, how much of that is determined by genetics? And there's actually a percentage that would go with that. Separated twin studies offered a great way of testing this. So with separated twin studies, you have children who are, let's say, adopted into different homes. And you look over time, let's get those twins back together when they're 20 or 30 years old and see what similarities they have, maybe in terms of occupation, likes and dislikes, and things of that nature, right? Okay. Well, William James and Darwin are two of my most favorite people, so I'm very excited to share information on this chapter with you. We will start with a video that talks about some of William James' life and how his struggles led to some of the best ideas and legacies that he gives us in psychology and in philosophy. And then we'll talk about some of those legacies in more detail.
I used to spend dozens of hours every single week proofreading. I was constantly fixing run-on sentences, unclear syntax, and repetitive language by hand until I found Grammarly. Grammarly is the AI writing partner that helps professionals write better, faster. Maybe it's a list of...
This is my copy of William James's Principles of Psychology, published in 1890. If you look through the table of contents, you'll see there's a wide variety of things covered in this book. We have the functions of the brain, on some general conditions of brain activity, habit, the automaton theory, the mind stuff theory, the methods and snares of psychology, the relations of minds to other things, the stream of thought, conception. We have perception of reality, reasoning, the production of movement, instinct, emotions, will, hypnotism. It's nearly 1,400 pages long, and its scope is massive. Many psychology textbooks were published before the Principles, but this book was very different from those. Here, James tried to explain how, physiologically, the human mind works, and it had a monumental impact on the growing field of psychology. In fact, for several decades after, it was rare for a psychology student anywhere in the world not to have read some part of the Principles in their education. And here's the amazing thing. This epic book took 12 years for William James to write. Have you ever done something that took 12 years to finish? Can you even remember where you were 12 years ago? Every great creation has an untold story behind it, a saga of perseverance, passion, and personal struggle. Today, I delve deep into one such tale that shaped the history of human understanding. Welcome to my channel, where I explore some of the intriguing anecdotes hidden behind the most influential research in psychology and neuroscience. I'm Eric Vanman, a psychologist at the University of Queensland. In today's video, I chronicle the incredible journey of William James and the creation of his groundbreaking work, The Principles of Psychology. In a previous video, which you can find here, I briefly introduced William James and why he's so important to psychology. Born in 1842, James hailed from a wealthy and intellectually stimulating family with 4 boys and 1 girl. Expectations were high, and the stage was set for greatness. Indeed, his younger brother Henry James became one of the leading novelists of his time, writing such classics as The Portrait of a Lady, The Wings of the Dove, and The Ambassadors. Their father was determined that his children have a world-class education, so he took the family to Europe on grand tours and to attend schools in England, France, and Switzerland. James and his siblings learned to speak English, French, German, and Italian fluently, and they all felt thoroughly at home anywhere in Europe. Yet, from an early age, William found himself trapped in the clutches of anxiety, depression, and fragile health, painting a stark contrast to the brilliance that surrounded him. His path to understanding wasn't a straight line. It was a winding road that took him from art school, where he painted watercolors and learned to draw, to studies of biology, which included some time that he spent accompanying the famous Louis Agassiz, a Harvard biologist, geologist, and paleontologist, on an 8-month expedition to the Amazon. And finally, James went to medical school because his father thought it would be a sensible profession. James grappled with bouts of existential crisis throughout this journey, amplified by physical illness and indecision. James was a knowledge seeker, yearning for a profound connection with the world around him, but he felt shackled by his limitations. He interrupted his medical studies from 1867 to 1868 to read Darwin, travel to Europe, and visit the laboratories of Fechner, Helmholtz, Wundt, and Dubois-Reymond. He ended up finally receiving his MD in 1869, but never practiced medicine. His personal struggle reached a fever pitch when James considered ending his life at 28. The weight of his thoughts became too much, and he stood on the precipice of oblivion. But at this darkest hour, the course of his life took an unexpected turn. he decided to accept the view of the French philosopher Charles Renouvier that we have free will, since we can sustain a thought because we choose to, when we might have other thoughts instead. James decided his first act of free will would be to believe in free will. He also resolved that he would take the mind seriously for the rest of his life. Harvard hired him in 1872 as an instructor in physiology and anatomy in the Department of Medicine. By 1874, he was offering a course on the relationship between physiology and psychology. How did he learn about psychology? Well, some of it came from his own experiences, but he also observed the behaviors of others around him, and he read all that he could from those in Europe that were conducting research. James once joked that the first lecture in psychology he ever heard was the first lecture he gave to his students. With renewed vigor, he threw himself into exploring the human mind. He embraced psychology as a drowning man would a lifeline. It wasn't an easy journey. His health deteriorated and his personal demons haunted him, but the spark of passion kept him going. Through grit and determination, he began to claw his way out of the abyss. In 1878, he made two major commitments. First, he married Alice Howe Gibbons. And two, he signed a contract with the publisher Henry Holt to write a textbook on psychology. After a decade of painstaking research and intense study, he started working on his masterpiece, The Principles of Psychology, and he told his publisher he hoped to have it finished in 2 years. The task turned out to be gargantuan. It took him over 12 arduous years to complete. During those long years, many major life events occurred. He and his wife had 4 children, one of whom died of whooping cough at 18 months. Both his parents died within a year of each other, and so did one of his younger brothers a year later. Every word he penned was a battle won, every chapter a testament to his resilience. The book became a mirror reflecting his inner journey, his struggles and his victories. He struggled with some of the chapters for many months. His vision failed him often, and sometimes his wife helped him by taking his dictation. He constantly suffered from back pain and sought out remedies for insomnia. Much of the book was handwritten, but sometime in the 1880s, he started using one of the first typewriters, even though it could only type in uppercase characters. Some chapters were published early as articles in scholarly journals. Some chapters were based on notes from his lectures at the university or to a public audience. During this time, he also started offering courses in psychology in the Department of Philosophy. He eventually ended up moving to that department for good, and there he established Harvard's Psychological Laboratory, one of the first in the United States, which was further developed in the 1890s when Hugo Münsterberg joined the department. James liked data, and he made sure his book focused on the latest empirical research. James himself conducted research on dizziness by spinning his participants around in a chair many times. And he looked into hypnosis. He personally hypnotized dozens of students to measure their perceptions, and he devoted a chapter to hypnosis in the Principles.
Who's coming in the driveway?
He was also very interested in parapsychology, particularly in the way psychics and seances worked. He spent thousands of hours observing famous psychics, seeking scientific explanations for their supposed mystical skills. Apparently, only one of those psychics ever truly stumped James, such that he could not come up with explanations about how she knew about events in his own life that he didn't know about yet. In 1889, even though he was probably not even 2/3 of the way done with his book, James decided to build a house to accommodate his growing family. So he worked with an architect and dithered about every detail of his new home. They ended up moving in December, and that's where James finished his book in the next year. That house on Irving Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts is still there. I happened to visit it in October 2022. It's just a few blocks from where the William James building that houses the Department of Psychology stands now. Finally, in May 1890, after innumerable drafts and countless sleepless nights, the 1,700-page manuscript was sent to Henry Holt. He wrote to Holt, "No one could be more disgusted than I at the sight of the book. No subject is worth being treated of in 1,000 pages. Had I 10 years more, I could rewrite it in 500, but as it stands, it is this or nothing, a loathsome, distended, tumefied, bloated, dropsical mass, testifying to nothing but 2 facts. First, that there's no such thing as a science of psychology, and second, that WJ isn't incapable. Yours, provided you hurry up things, William James. It wasn't merely a book, it was a revolution. A work that seamlessly intertwined philosophy and science to delve into the mysteries of the human mind. James's journey wasn't without hardships, but he transformed his struggles into a beacon of mankind. His exploration of the human mind, inspired by his personal battles, revealed the complexity of human consciousness and pioneered a whole new realm of psychological understanding. James gave us the concept of a stream of consciousness, the idea of self, and delved into the mysteries of habits, will, and attention. He helped us understand ourselves better, providing insights into the very fabric of our thoughts and emotions. The story of William James is one of triumph over adversity, a tale of how personal trials can lead to profound insights and everlasting contributions. His magnum opus, The Principles of Psychology, remains a cornerstone in the field, reminding us of the extraordinary journey of its creator. James once said, "The greatest use of life is to spend it for something that outlasts it." Indeed, his work has outlasted him, influencing generations of thinkers and reshaping how we perceive ourselves. And his story, his inspiring journey, is a beacon of light for all of us, reminding us that even in the midst of our darkest battles, we can create something truly timeless. If you enjoyed this journey into the life and work of William James, don't forget to subscribe.
Okay, I have written a couple of things on the board. Tell me about William James's personal life and what kind of person he, like if you get a picture in your mind of the kind of person he was, any of those thoughts.
Said he struggled with anxiety and depression at a young age, so I'd see like really like jittery and like standoffish.
Which is a lot different than someone like Darwin, who is known to be very outgoing, right? Easily made friends. Jittery, standoffish, anxious, depressed, other things.
He was a knowledge seeker.
I like that, knowledge seeker. To the point of that almost being an obsession for him, right? They talk about the fact that he suffered an existential crisis. From what I know about him, it sounds like he suffered from a series of existential crises. And the good thing about that, although hard for him to go through, I'm sure, is that we reaped a lot of the benefits of that crisis because he tried to figure out, why is this happening, right? And in doing so, he gave us a lot of great writings and understanding about things like will and habit that have been very long lasting. Anything else about him as a person? I would say extremely motivated. His motivation reminds me of Penfield, all right, who was just so very motivated to practice brain surgery and specifically look into treating people with epilepsy, right? So had a strong mission, knowledge seeker, very motivated. Anything else?
He wanted to share his knowledge.
So imparting wisdom was very important, and that idea is really encapsulated in that quote toward the end of the video. Anything else?
It mentions in the video that he suffered from like chronic back pain and insomnia whenever he was like in his adulthood. So that gives me the idea that like he was very anxious about like the future and just like on day to day he was very anxious about things and had trouble.
And some of that we'll find out is due to the fact that he contracted an illness when he was on that 8-month expedition. But also potentially some of that is psychosomatic, meaning maybe it's idiopathic, and if they were to look, there's not one physiological cause, but perhaps it's more an emotional manifestation of some things, right? And then, when you suffer from chronic back pain, quality of life is decreased generally. And then insomnia, as someone who is an insomniac, that can also cause you to, your quality of life to suffer, right? Yeah. Okay, professional life. Tell me a little bit about what this man accomplished in spite of struggling, or maybe in part because of struggling.
I think that's the part because of it. Like the knowledge seeker, like a lot of times, I think a lot of the smartest people that I know, like they're looking for something, but they don't know exactly what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
It's I know it when I'll see it.
Okay.
But until then, they just kind of in general, like trying to find stuff out.
Almost as though they're on a quest.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
He read a textbook on psychology that took over 12 years for him to complete.
And what was it, like 1,700 pages? Yeah. What did he have to say about that textbook?
I think by the end of it, he was just done with it. He just wanted to get it over with because that's what he was saying. He's like, if I had more time, I could shorten it down, but I just don't want to see it anymore. He's like,
Right,
yeah, for 12 years.
yes. And those of you who've written, you can probably understand that. But hopefully it would not take you 12 years to write something. It was definitely a labor of, he was very intentional. I'm sure he questioned every single thing that went down on that page. But he really put himself down when he talked about the fact that this is bloated, and all I know after making this or writing this book is there's no such thing as psychology. So super, super hard on himself, right? The public viewed this as an amazing work, though. So there was an incongruency between how he perceived things at times versus how things were taken up by the larger public, which I find interesting. And he might have been hard on himself as a writer, given that his brother was Henry James, who is a novelist of great acclaim. If you haven't read Portrait of a Lady, it's a really great book. So they were both very famous in their own right. Anything else in terms of what he pursued? What was an early pursuit? Physiology. He was fascinated with physiology, and we'll talk more about that.
He started in art school,
He started in art school.
which led to him following around a biologist, a geologist, and a paleontologist.
He had an expedition to the Amazon. Oh, and by the way, he went to medical school. Yeah, I mean, just Harvard Medical School, It's amazing to think of, right? He never practiced medicine, but he had that degree. His interest in mechanistic physiology also brought him into crisis mode. He was spiritual, and he was fascinated with mechanistic physiology and what it could explain, but he found that that was at odds with his spirituality. And it took him a long time to be able to say, I don't have to negate what mechanistic physiology has to say about things. I don't have to negate what religion and spirituality says about life, but I'm going to hold those two concepts somewhat separately, right? Because if he tried to take that all together, there were too many, it would be hypocritical, right? But if he was able to separate this into two different realms, then he could deal with that. And that's what he chose to do, right? So he problem solved in terms of that. He did become a lecturer, right, in psychology. Okay. Well, we're going to go into more detail on William James. born in 1842 and died in 1910. Everyone, he was born in New York City. This chapter will expose us to Americans, right? 4 Americans that were very prevalent around this time period in the field. He was the oldest child and came from a very wealthy family. And I'll tell you how his family became wealthy. There was a shrewd investment in the building of the Erie Canal. So his family, extended family, was involved in building the Erie Canal and reaped a lot of financial rewards, shall we say, from that. I thought that was interesting. Talks in the video about the fact that the children moved throughout the U.S. and Europe. And it was this idea, the father was interested in them receiving the best education possible. They would move about a lot. I think that the video said that all children learned to speak like 4 languages pretty fluently. Again, pretty amazing. And unfortunately, the dad never found an ideal place to educate the 5 children. So some of William James's personality characteristics might overlap with what it sounds like his dad was like. His father was Henry James Sr., like I said, very well off, but spiritually troubled. He had thought he wanted a life as a theologian, but after 2 years, he dropped out of Princeton Theological Seminary because he felt oppressed by the stern religious doctrine and this sort of, this is not a technical term, but the unwiggly aspect of religion, all right? All these things that you had to take as truths. And if he doubted those things, then he felt like, I'm being a hypocrite, right? So enough of a battle that he said, this is just not going to happen for me. Henry James Sr. thereafter really struggled to find a meaningful vocation, to the extent that he experienced extreme anxiety. Along with this existential crisis, the constant sense that the foundation of his existence had been pulled out from under him. He suffered from what they called back in the day vastations, and you may want to make a note of this. It's on page 281. Vastations were basically, that was the word for what was going on with him. And he met someone by the name of Emanuel Swedenborg, a mystical philosopher, and he basically diagnosed James Sr. as having vastations. Well, Swedenborg talked a lot to William James's father, and this put James Sr. at ease. He spent the rest of his life on a quest to convey Swedenborg's very complicated philosophy to basically anyone who would listen. That became his life's work alongside educating his children, basically, or finding good education for his children. I don't think we have time to watch this today, but just for your edification, if you'd like to click on that video, it's interesting, and it's like 3 minutes long. All right. Okay, there was a stern intellectual atmosphere in the home. I've read a little bit about the intellectual atmosphere of the Kennedy household when the Kennedys were growing up. There was strict discipline in many ways, but there also was this idea that you better come to the dinner table knowing what went on in the news that day and be able at a very young age to have a discussion, a critical dialogue with parents and with other siblings. And that reminds me of the Kennedys, what they're talking about in terms of the James family. This is more, well, it's pretty serious and somber. The vagabond, intellectually boisterous lifestyle, I like how that's described, produced mixed effects in his children. The oldest 2 became very famous. Okay, Henry James and William James both became very famous, but the other 3 children, they did not do well at all. By like anyone's standards, they didn't do well. The 2 younger sons were prone to alcoholism and neurotic illness, very severe. It says on page 282, the 2 younger sons seem to have felt intimidated and overshadowed by their elders. I can only imagine what it would be like to have those 2 as your older brothers. However, and despite early promise, they grew up prone to neurotic illness and alcoholism. Alice, the youngest child, suffered the most. She was extremely gifted, but during this time, educational attainment for women, getting a degree from Harvard wasn't something that was attainable, right? And so she felt stifled. Here she is, she has all these interests, she has a desire for deep knowledge about the way the world works, and felt pushed down by that oppressive academic climate in terms of being a woman. Well, she became an invalid over time. She grew up to become a chronic invalid, the textbook says, plagued by bouts of hysterical incapacitation and breakdowns. She produced a fascinating diary before her early death from cancer at age 43, and was unquestionably a prime victim of the restrictive gender attitudes of her time. Okay. So lots of pressure from the father to do well. That was felt by all the children. The pursuit of art was something that William James wanted to become an artist. What you don't hear in the video is that there was no way that the dad was going to allow that to happen. All right. And in fact, in our textbook, our author tells us that the father threatened to kill himself if his son became an artist. All right. Talk about putting a burden on a son's shoulders. It was dramatic, but still the thought was there, like, I sure better not do this or my family is going to disown me. In 1861, he went to Harvard to study chemistry. The dad says, yeah, I think chemistry is an okay vocation, so let's have you do that instead. But once there, he shifted his focus to physiology. He was very interested in mechanistic physiology of the day. Dad got concerned maybe William James is not going to make enough money in this new field, so why don't you enroll in medical school? So that's what he did. During medical school, he left to go on a specimen hunting expedition that was about 8 months long. And this was happening at that time. A lot of people were inspired by what Darwin did, and so these expeditions were fairly common. Remember, Galton had his own expeditions, travel expeditions, so did William James. One of his principal roles in this expedition was to collect and crate jellyfish in Brazil. Fairly specific, right? During this time, we know that Darwin fell ill during his journey. Well, so did William James. He contracted smallpox with some devastating long-term impacts. All right. Overall, he suffered for the rest of his life with chronic illness, chronic back pain from this. He also had weakened eyesight. He comes out of this expedition and is like, well, things didn't go so well. I'm really struggling. I'm going to go to Germany where they have these mineral baths. That was really big at the time. Mineral baths were said to help with mental and physical health. And he did receive some benefit from the mineral baths in terms of his eyesight, or that's what he thought it was from, right? During that time in Germany, there was a lot going on. The foundations of mechanistic physiology were being laid, and that further encouraged his interest in that discipline. Like I said, mechanistic physiology impressed him intellectually, but he was discouraged spiritually. Coupled with the death of his favorite cousin, soon after his return from Germany, he spiraled into terrible depression, bouts of anxiety, bouts of insomnia, existential crises, etc., etc. And it took him a while to recover from this. In his recovery, he learned that he needed to reframe the events, reframe things in a more positive manner. So he helped himself recover from this. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, he returned to medical school and finished up in 1869, and then in 1870 he wrote an essay on free will. This will be on exam 3, but it's one of the most important of the many important things that William James did and talked about. How would you define will? What is will?
Kind of like trying to define intelligence, I know, but I'm still going to ask you.
I'll just say this is going to be a really bad definition.
Okay, so I'm not even going to listen to how you preface this. It's going to be great, whatever you have to offer, right? I'm reframing for you.
It's
All right.
the ability to do anything that you want to do. Just want almost.
Desire, you would say, is a key component. Others, to add on to that.
I would say free will is just like your ability to make choices on what you want to do,
Okay,
or decide to do
I like that too.
in situations.
In order to do that, you need to feel like you have control over your life and over your decisions, right? So in psychology, we call that an internal locus of control. We have a sense of agency over what we do. We're not merely reacting to what life throws at us, okay? Anything else on will? If someone has a strong will, what does that mean?
They're very passionate about what they're trying to accomplish or do.
They are very passionate. Sometimes people can be labeled strong-willed and it has more of a negative connotation, like a bullheaded type of thing, okay? And then if we think of someone who's weak-willed, that would be someone I would think of who may be very dependent, sort of floating around, doesn't have much of a purpose, okay? All right, so in 1870, he wrote his essay on free will, and he said his first act of free will is to believe in free will.
Also, doesn't like free will have to have a concept of not being governed or like feeling like a moral obligation of something else controlling you?
Yes. And we're not going to be able to talk about it as deeply as I wish we could, but yes. On page 285, the psychologist and philosopher Alexander Bain was talking about will and also habit, which ties in to will. And on the subject of habit, he stressed the importance of the voluntary repetition of morally desirable actions if they are to become habitual and automatic. So maybe that ties in a little bit to what you were saying, but I do see a morality component within will. So Bain got James interested in this idea of habit. Bain stressed that we've got to do something over and over and over, many repetitions, to establish neural connections. All right? He didn't specifically say neural connections like we would say today, but that idea of creating a pathway, right? And strengthening those neural connections over time. And it can take quite a while to establish a habit. What I want you to do right now is write down, jot down, or type in we're going to skip to habit, then we'll circle back. Think about your own habits. Write down 5 everyday habits that you exhibit. Take one more minute. And then I would like to hear from each of you on a habit that you have. I will also share a couple of mine. Knowing that habits in and of themselves, saying habit isn't good or bad, but we can have habits that are good for us, right? And we can also have habits that maybe aren't as good or that we could work on improving, all right? And Christina, since you're doing that, I'm gonna start with you, a habit you have.
Playing on my phone all the time.
Playing on your phone, okay, yeah. So playing on your phone maybe more than you need to.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So perhaps you have free will to change that. A desirable thing to do would be maybe to first monitor and then figure out how might I cut back on some of that? What could I put in place for myself? Okay, we're continuing this way. Jasmine.
Spending more than my budget.
Okay, yeah. So spending more money than you have in your bank account or on your credit cards. All right. Okay, others.
I pick at my fingers when I'm anxious.
Okay. And these are all habits that don't sound, you guys are being really hard on yourselves, but I'll take it. Pick at your fingernails. When you're anxious, okay, and that's a really common habit.
Yeah.
So finger spell, like ASL, like a lot of times whenever I think, I just happen to spell it out.
Oh, finger spell, okay.
Sometimes even if I'm thinking negative things, sometimes it's even that too. So anybody who can read as quickly as I can sign, sometimes.
Interesting.
Direct line of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
I said I take my meds and my vitamins.
Good for you. Do you have a set time when you do that to make sure it happens?
I take my vitamins and stuff in the morning and my allergy medicine in the morning. And then I take my others at night. Yes.
So you have a routine to make
Yes.
sure all of that happens. Good. I'm glad to hear that. And that you take vitamins. That's a habit I probably need to pick up or eat more veggies at the very least.
My habit's like very basic. I just like brush my teeth like 2 times a day. Like just simple habits.
Okay, yes, that's a habit. That's I think a good one to hang on to your teeth into older adulthood. And is that paired with anything like?
Well, I take a bunch of showers throughout the day, like 2 to 3 showers. So I will brush my teeth right after I get out of the shower.
Okay, all right. Using the pairing technique, which can be very effective. Right?
Putting on my watch in the mornings.
Okay. And why is that an important habit for you?
I like it like whenever like we work out in the mornings. I like to know like we do it like a lot of time based stuff. So like I'll set my timer or like I'll start the workout on my watch just to be aware of time and like where we're at.
Yeah, very good. All right. It's dollar height.
When I do every day is I clean my room every night before bed because my daughter likes to get stuff out and it bothers me until I have to have everything.
I can tell it bothers you. I just like, okay. So I'll list a couple of my habits. One habit that I have had to develop over the years is laying out everything I need for the morning before I go to sleep. I mean, we're talking, I knew I was going to wear this whole ensemble, even down to the socks. I have things I need close to the door so I don't forget, because left to my own devices, there's this academic side, then there's a side that I hate to say it is kind of airheady, all right, and forget like common sense things I forget or leave behind that I should just know better. So I have that. I make a routine of it at night and it takes up time. If I'm tired, it doesn't matter. I know from experience I have to do it or I'll be late. And I can run late to teach a 10 a.m. class. That's just lazy, right? So I have all of that and I've also learned I'm trying to get better at cleaning up before I go to sleep and clean up my surroundings, because I tend to just, the day goes and I just have things all around me and the clutter doesn't bother me. All right. I know a lot of people it bothers and that's a really good thing. But I have found at work I do it because I do not want to come into work feeling overwhelmed. So that was a habit that I started at work and I'm pretty good at doing the cleaning up before I leave, and that now I'm trying to transfer to home. Yeah. And then a bad habit of mine is if there's something I really, and I would even say this is true for some of my job responsibilities, there are some things I really don't want to do, and I will do everything in my power not to do that thing. It will loom huge, big in my head and weigh me down. And it's maybe a simple thing, but I think of this as, oh, that sounds boring, or I'm not really good at that task, or anything like that. And it can cause problems. It can really cause problems. So that is something I'm having to work on and figuring out with the habit. Maybe I need to pair that with some sort of like tangible reward for myself. I don't know. But yeah, so continue to think about your habits, how they developed, ones that came about somewhat unwittingly, and then habits that you have developed as a problem-solving technique, right? I think this is all fascinating. So he stressed the enormous importance in terms of society of our habitual responses on the maintenance of society. What does that mean? Kind of confusing sounding.
So I think like basic social niceties instead of our immediate knee-jerk reaction. So
Okay.
basically, being civil isn't always isn't always our first reaction, but it has to be a habit that we get into to maintain the civil society.
Okay, good, yeah. And if you have a chance to read this before next time on page 289, that's broken down into a little bit more detail. That's why I put the page number there. Okay. Laws of habit formation are impartial, capable of producing morally good or bad actions.
Once a bad habit begins to become established, it's very hard to reverse its course. So it's easier just not to do the thing to start with, right? He urged young people, so people that he instructed on the college level, to decide on desirable behavior and then practice it deliberately and repeatedly. You just don't think your way into something becoming a habit. It's an action sort of thing. He gave himself the same prescription when dealing with personal crisis. Okay, I'm going to work through this. I'm going to establish some habits that are going to help me get through. I have the free will to establish those habits. If we have time next class period, I want to talk to you about the extent to which William James influenced the development of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's pretty amazing. It's a very interesting connection, and a lot of that has to do with the idea of free will and habit as it's applied to the treatment of alcoholism. Okay? All right, we were on habit. I may need to back it up now. Okay. Graduate from medical school, but still living at home with your parents at age 30. All right. Yeah. It was much more rare back in the day. So when the Harvard president invited him to teach half of a newly developed physiology course, he jumped at this idea. All right. Not completely gainfully employed, but somewhat. Still probably spending more than he had, right? But having a little bit more. He was known at Harvard as a wonderful, exceptional teacher. Students had a lot to say about him. First and foremost, they said he treated us like intellectual equals. And again, that was back in the day where a lot of times it was that strict disciplinarian way of learning and rote memorization, and there's not room for you to have thoughts or share your thoughts or ideas about something. This was very different, to have that ability to feel like you could talk to your professor one-on-one and that they are really going to listen to what you have to say and they think what you have to say is important. He had a very personalized, lively approach to subject matter, and he revised subject matter as he learned more. So he learns more about physiology, maybe some things that went against what he was teaching last semester. He tries to do that. And that's one thing, a habit that I've tried to establish first in this class, but it's trickled into other classes. Even though this is my third time teaching the class, I will tell you, I read the chapters over the weekend. I read through, I find many new things. Every time I do a PowerPoint, it's slightly different based on what I learn and what I think is important to you. So I think that's important as someone who is an educator to continue educating themselves and treat the material as very important. Although his tenure as a psychologist was brief, it was highly influential. Okay. I love this quote. Wilhelm Wundt, tell me about how he operated as a research assistant. Do you remember how he was described? Not very complimentary. He kept to himself, he did what he needed to do, but really didn't socialize any more than he had to with the researcher and with the other research assistants. He knew what he was going to do, and all of that stuff was getting in the way of what he wanted to do, right? But I do really like this quote. It speaks to their personalities. Wundt brought psychology to the university for specialists, and he did see this as being the experimental method should be the approach that we should use, right, to understanding. James made it a living subject for anyone who chose to read his work or listen to him. This also suggests that they had different degrees of ability when it came to conveying their subject matter. Okay, James's most famous psychological metaphor is known as stream of consciousness. And another James, James Joyce, wrote a book called Ulysses, which was one of the first books that was written in full-on stream of consciousness. But as in terms of how it applies to psychology and the human mind, he gave the analogy that the contents of the human mind are more like a stream than a collection of discrete elements. And we have others we've talked about who say there are all these components of the mind and they work together with varying degrees of success. He said, no, there aren't these discrete elements. It's a stream. It's a stream because we never have the exact same sensation, idea, or experience twice. We also bring all of those prior things with us. Our continuous thoughts are not static, but always flowing. I know for myself, in terms of thinking about the human mind as a stream, that really resonates. Others may think, no, I think more the discrete elements. So, wherever you fall, just know that that was his idea. And that makes sense. If things are always flowing, ideas are always flowing, then we can make a lot of changes to our life, right? We can practice free will. We can engage in habit formation. Okay. Last thing I want to cover today before we go to the exam review is emotion. In his large 1,700-page work on psychology, he covered so many things, right, as the person in the video told us. He did have a chapter devoted on emotion, and his thoughts on emotion were derived from his own crisis and resolution. And let me give you a page on this. This is pretty important stuff. I mean, it all is, but according to James, an emotion is actually the consequence rather than the cause of the physiological effects. And I'm just going to read this. Common sense, this is on page 290. Common sense says we lose our fortune, are sorry about this, and we weep. So the fortune loss happens. We feel bad about it, and then we express the emotion, okay? We meet a bear, are frightened. So the bear meeting occurs, we feel a certain way about that, and then we express the emotion by running. We are insulted by a rival, we become angry, and we strike. Hopefully you don't do that, but that is expressing an emotion, right? It's expressing a big emotion. The hypothesis here to be defended says this order of sequence is incorrect, that the one mental state is not immediately induced by the other, that the bodily manifestations must first be interposed between, and that the more rational statement is that we feel sorry because we cry. Does that make sense? So he's flipping the equation there. Angry because we strike, afraid because we tremble, and not that we cry, strike, or tremble because we are sorry, angry, or fearful. All right? This theory of emotion has been questioned, but it is known as the James Lang theory of emotion. And it says to honor both men, the idea that emotions represent the perception of bodily responses has traditionally been called this theory, because there was a Danish psychologist who was also saying similar things about emotion. Okay. Okay, we will cover that on Thursday. Let's talk about the exam for a little bit. It's going to be composed basically in the same manner as the other exam was, so you know perhaps how to study. Boy, there's a lot on this, isn't there? Looking at the study guide, which I hope you have, are there items on it that you want me to specifically mention again or give you more information about? Maybe items that you're thinking, Dr. Mansell, you didn't really cover that very much and now you're testing us on it? I don't know if you don't tell me.
Erasmus Darwin, that's his father, correct? Right?
Erasmus Darwin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's cute. Grandfather. Yeah. And he was the one that started the Lunar Society. So if you have to talk about
Darwin, knowing that he's one of my faves, there's going to be a Darwin question on the exam, all right? And that is going to be information from the textbook. So much of the information from the textbook was in the video. In terms of Darwin, to do well on the essay question, what might be items you would want to include? So there's like important things and then there's trivial, interesting things. And I want the important chunks. So what would be something important to include about Darwin? Yes,
I think that would be at the forefront. Very good. Theory of evolution, big thing. So you would tell me what it is. What do we mean by that? And then the bigger one, how did it develop? And that's when you take us back through taking, stepping aboard the Beagle, which I still think is a very silly name for a ship. Just doesn't sound safe, right? Maybe call it a Rottweiler or I don't know. Probably not a border collie, though sounds friendly. But anyway, from his voyage on the Beagle, how did he come to this theory of evolution? And it was there were many parts, right? One way you could break that down is to talk about, he came up with a plan for himself. He was a habit he established for himself, right, in terms of recording specimen. And he went from geological formations to what? Looking at, starts with an F. Huh?
Flora and fauna.
Say that again?
Flora.
Flora and fauna? Yes, flora and fauna and fossils. Oh my, okay, the 3 Fs. Flora, fauna, fossils. I like that. Will you remember that? And he noticed interesting things about all of this. And in terms of flora and fauna, the adaptations that appear to occur due to the environment in which those objects lived, right? What else might be important to mention in reference to good old Charles?
Natural selection.
Very good. Natural selection. On the exam study guide, I note a few items. Polygenesis and monogenesis, sexual selection, complementarity of the sexes. What is that?
Would that be like the features that like the male birds have compared to like the female birds?
Yes, and then taking that to humans, right, which was, let's see what page that was on. 28. This was the widely held belief that men and women have evolved to have different but complementary psychological characteristics. Woman is nurturer, woman is sensitive, the man is, strong, and those sorts of things. So he was ascribing characteristics to the different genders. You'll need to know polygenesis.
This is the argument that non-European, quote-unquote, savage people represent a distinctly different species of being compared to Europeans. Monogenesis means we all, at some point, came from the same being. All right, so be able to distinguish those. Let's see. Comparative psychology, everyone, is comparing this idea of what we see in animals to what we see in humans, okay? I feel like you're going to do well on all the Galton information because that's in your head most recently. It's been implanted there. That sounds really odd, but so let's see. Review all the videos we've covered and be ready, really ready to discuss them.
Do we need to know anything about David Hume?
No. I mean, you should, but not for the exam. Yeah.
Immanuel Kant, noumenal, phenomenal world. You'll need to know the difference, and we spent quite a bit of time on that. Helmholtz law of specific nerve energies. You'll need to know about Helmholtz's life and what led him to doing the things he did with the legs of frogs. Bad joke, okay. I've not covered this a lot, and I made a note when I was going over this in my office before class. Vitalism is the idea that all living organisms are animated by an immaterial life force, like a spirit of sorts. That's vitalism. The just noticeable difference, everyone, I don't know if we even covered this in class. That's the minimum amount of difference you have between two stimuli that's necessary to tell them apart. Absolute threshold in terms of sensation, that is the smallest amount of a stimulus needed to detect the stimulus. Okay? And apperception, there's a good explanation in the book and also in the glossary on A33. I think a good review would be to consult the glossary if you don't do that regular. That's really good. So apperception for Wundt. In Wundt's laboratory, a separately measured stage in reaction time experiments in which the meaning of a stimuli is accurately registered in the consciousness. Okay, so apperception has two different meanings based on who we're talking about. Gestalt psychology, concerned with the form, right? Do you feel pretty good going into this? Ready for it to open at 5 on Wednesday and close before midnight on Sunday. So you have a lot of time to take it. All right, if that's everything, I would love to let you go and enjoy the rest of the day. Maybe take a quick nature walk, even if it's only to your car or your dorm, what have you. Take a longer one if you can. And I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Then we have spring break.